All right. Good afternoon. We are going to give folks just a few minutes to come into the room and settle in. So we'll start here right about 2:01. I see folks still trickling in, so we'll start at 2:01. All right. Well, let's get started here. Thank you all for joining us, and welcome to the sixth installment of this listening session series regarding the Washington Cares Fund um, rulemaking that we're doing. I'm Ariel Finney. I'm the WaCares Fund Policy and Rules Manager. I'm joined today by Maria Mangaro, the Washington Cares Fund Eligibility Program Manager. We're part of the Department of Social and Health Services Washington Cares Fund team working on rulemaking for a new chapter of Washington Administrative Code. Each meeting, we're focusing on specific topics related to rulemaking, and today we'll be focusing on beneficiary rights and responsibilities. We had previously said regarding this meeting that we would be talking about the application process, but we ended up covering that in an earlier session. So we're going to be focusing today on rights and responsibilities. We will only be addressing rulemaking for the Department of Social and Health Services. Employment Security Department is also doing rulemaking. So please reach out to Employment Security Department if you're interested in their rulemaking activities. I will be dropping a link to their website here in the chat here shortly, so stay tuned for that. Our agenda is up on the screen, and we are going to start with a few housekeeping items as we usually do. For those who have been here for a few of our sessions now, we're following very much the same cadence each meeting and going over some housekeeping, common terms, going into our presentation on rights and responsibilities, and then we'll end with the discussion. We are scheduled today for 2 hours. We are consistently running closer to about an hour per session. This meeting in particular may run a little bit shorter than that because we have a fairly brief presentation and we'll leave some room for discussion. But please know we'll probably end pretty early today. All right, so we have the Q&A feature available for questions throughout the presentation today. We will do our best to address questions as we go, but please be patient if your question is not answered live. We will do our best to circle back and get to those questions, but if not, we will also do our best to follow up with you. If your question is not answered, but you want to make sure it gets put into our queue, you are also welcome to email me directly, and I will share my information here shortly on how to reach me if you have questions. The chat will be disabled during the presentation, but we will open the chat for our discussion. The recording of this webinar and the slide deck will be available on the website the website listed on the screen. I will also be sharing this in the chat here shortly. Our next meeting will be May 29th from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. on provider rights and provider application process. So please stay tuned for that, especially for those who are interested in rulemaking as it relates to providers. We are going to be doing a 3-part series focused just on providers. So please make sure to sign up and register for our next session on May 29th. Our purpose today is to hear ideas from you all about rulemaking. We are just beginning our initial drafts of rules and want to hear the values of our community so we can integrate that feedback into our drafts. Our focus today is on rulemaking and hearing your ideas and recommendations. In order to remain focused on the purpose of our meeting, we will not be addressing any program-related questions. If you have questions about the WaCares Fund program, please email wacars@dshs.wa.gov, and our customer care team members will assist in answering your questions. All right, for those who have been here before, hopefully these terms are becoming common knowledge for you, but for those who are joining us for the first time, I do like to take a moment here to talk about some common terms you'll hear us refer to. I will also do my best to explain terms that we bring up along the way. But there are some that you've already heard me refer to and will be pretty common throughout the presentation and discussion in terms that you'll see along the way just regarding the WA Cares program. So the Department of Social and Health Services is the lead on the Washington Cares Fund project. This meeting series is focused on the work being done by the Department of Social and Health Services, as I've already mentioned. You will commonly hear the Department of Social and Health Services referred to as DSHS. Employment Security Department also has a major role in this project. Employment Security Department is leading the work on employee contributions. You will commonly hear the Employment Security Department referred to as ESD. Healthcare Authority is the third department responsible for a major part of the Washington Cares Fund program. They are responsible for the payment system, verifying use of benefits, and establishing criteria for payment of benefits to providers. You will commonly hear the Healthcare Authority referred to as HCA. Long-term services and supports, or LTSS, refers to a variety of services and resources to assist people who experience a long-term disability to maintain their safety and comfort. The Revised Code of Washington, or RCW, refers to statute, as well as the language enacted, which is language enacted by the legislature. These are the laws that provide program direction, limitation, and grant permission to state agencies for rulemaking. You've already heard me use the term Washington Cares Fund or WA Cares Fund. I tend to go back and forth. I will typically default back to WA Cares Fund, but you also may see Washington Cares Fund or WA Cares Fund referenced as WCF. Washington Administrative Code, or WAC, or WAC, are rules developed by government agencies to implement policies and procedures as delegated by the legislature. You may also hear WACs referred to as rules or regulations. When I refer to rulemaking, it's regarding developing or amending Washington Administrative Code, or WAC. And that's, again, why we're here today, in regards to developing this Washington Administrative Code for the WA Cares Fund. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maria Bungaro to talk to us about beneficiary rights and responsibilities.
Thank you, Ariel. First, I want to provide a little bit of information on what are rights and responsibilities. A right is a privilege that individuals are entitled to and protected by law, such as human rights and legal rights. And responsibility is something that individuals should do. A quick example is how eligible beneficiaries have a right to use their WA Cares Fund benefit, and they also have the responsibility to submit an application in order to use their WA Cares Fund benefit. Rights and responsibilities are very common for agencies and programs, and it's important for everyone to know their rights and responsibilities. To start off, we will reference the RCW for WA Cares. RCW 50B04020 states that the Department of Social and Health Services shall adopt rules and procedures necessary to implement and administer the activities specified in this section related to the program. At WA Cares, we think rights and responsibilities are necessary, especially regarding eligibility determinations, so that beneficiaries know their rights and responsibilities throughout the process. This will also help inform beneficiaries of their right to appeal agency actions regarding eligibility determinations. And over the years, the Department of Social and Health Services has developed a robust list of rights and responsibilities. And with WA Cares being part of DSHS, we felt many aligned with the rights and responsibilities we are considering. Of course, with WA Cares being a different program, there are a few differences in rights and responsibilities. Next, we will reference Medicaid's long-term services and supports, rights and responsibilities that are already established in the Washington Administrative Code, or WAC. WAC 388-106-1300 is an example of what rights looks like in rule. This WAC states that as a client of the department, You have a right to be treated with dignity, respect, and without discrimination, not be abused, neglected, financially exploited, abandoned, have your property treated with respect, not answer questions, turn down services, and not accept case management services you do not want to receive. However, it may not be possible for the department to offer some services if you do not give enough information. Be told about all services you can receive and make choices about services you want or don't want. Have information about you kept private within the limits of the laws and DSHS regulations. Be told in writing of agency decisions and receive a copy of your care plan. Make a complaint without fear of harm. Not be forced to answer questions or do something you don't want to. Talk with your social service worker's supervisor if you and your social service worker do not agree. Request a fair hearing. Have interpreter services provided to you free of charge if you cannot speak or understand English well. Take part in and have your wishes included in planning your care. Choose, fire, or change a qualified provider you want. And receive results of the background check for any individual provider you choose. Again, I just want to highlight that this WAC is an example of what rights look like in rule. And I just want to reference again that this is WAC 388-106-1300. I may have mentioned an extra 8 in there and I apologize. But next we will review responsibilities. WAC 388-106-1303 references client responsibilities for Medicaid long-term services and supports. This is an example of what responsibilities could look like in rule. As a client of the department, you have a responsibility to give us enough information to assess your needs, let the social services worker into your home so that your needs can be assessed, follow your care plan, not act in a way that puts anyone in danger, provide a safe workplace, tell your social services worker if there is a change in your medical condition, the help you get from family or other agencies, where you live or your financial situation. Tell your social services worker if someone else makes medical or financial decisions for you. Choose a qualified provider. Inform the department and your home care agency if an employee assigned by the home care agency is related to you by blood, marriage, adoption, or registered domestic partnership. Keep provider background checks private. Tell your social services worker if you are having problems with your provider. And choose your own healthcare. Tell your social services worker when you do not do what your doctor says. Again, this is what responsibilities could look like. We wanted to provide this information for context as to what rights and responsibilities could look like in the WAC or in rule. Next, we will review what we are considering for beneficiaries' rights and responsibilities for the WAC Cares Fund. Beneficiaries have the right to choose the setting to receive services, choose their registered provider, choose how to receive their care, such as frequency and duration, have access to language services, such as interpreters and translated documents, have equal access to services, have access to an accurate benefit balance. Next, we will review beneficiary responsibilities. Beneficiaries have the responsibility to provide enough information to determine eligibility, determine plan of care or service delivery with their chosen provider, manage their benefit balance, notify the department of a legal decision maker, provide requested information to the department, such as identification verification or proof of residency prior to implementation of portability. Establish a plan of care or services with the registered provider. Communicate expectations with the provider. Negotiate rates with the provider within the maximum allowed payment rates. Approve payment authorizations for providers. Contact the WellCares Fund Customer Care Center to adjust authorizations, such as changing an end date or canceling the authorization, and report provider concerns to DSHS. As I previously mentioned in the beginning, it's important to know rights and responsibilities. And in WellCares, as a self-directed program, the beneficiary would be managing their own budget and working directly with providers for payment authorization. Now I will pass it back to Ariel for our next section.
All right. Thank you so much, Maria, for giving us that run through of rights and responsibilities in rule and some ideas of what we're thinking about when it comes to rights and responsibilities for our WellCares program, particularly for beneficiaries. So at this point, I'm going to be opening up the chat because we are going to be moving into our discussion. While we do that, while I do that, I'm going to put our first prompt up here on the screen. Our question for you all is thinking about the proposed rights and responsibilities of beneficiaries. What do you think is missing? So we gave you some ideas of what we were thinking about. Don't worry too much if you can't remember, maybe it was on the screen, maybe it wasn't. I'm going to ask you to put it in the chat. And again, I'm going to be opening up our chat right now, so you should be able to put your answer in there. If you also would prefer to share verbally, I am happy to unmute you. So if you would like to come off of mute, please raise your hand and I will come in and unmute. So there are two ways of engaging. One will be in the chat. One will be by raising your hand and I will unmute you and you can share verbally. I do ask that those who share verbally try to be mindful of our time and just the discussion with other folks. So try to keep comments around 2 minutes or so, just so we can keep things moving and leave opportunity here for others. So again, our question for you all is thinking about the proposed rights and responsibilities of beneficiaries. What do you think is missing? And while you're thinking about the answers to that question, I am going to share some resources with you in the chat. First, we have our DSHS website for rulemaking. I talked about that earlier on in the presentation. And this is where you can go and register for our upcoming listening sessions. You can also get information about where we're at within the rulemaking process with our one-on-ones are posted there. The Employment Security Department's website will get you up to date on any rulemaking activities that they're doing. The Healthcare Authority website will also give you information about their rulemaking, though they do not expect to start until 2025. I've also included a link to the WellCares customer care team email. So if you have general program questions, feel free to email it there. But if you have rulemaking questions, you can reach me at my email listed in the chat. I will also share this at the end of the presentation, but just for those who are curious, those are some resources. But I am hoping folks can participate here regarding our first question. I know I'm very curious, and our big motivation for having these meetings is to hear from you all. So if you're here and have some ideas, please share them in the chat or raise your hand and unmute. And thank you, Kyle, for jumping in there for us, being the first person. It's always the hardest role, but I very much appreciate that. Kyle put in the chat here, have ways to address claims of discrimination. I think that is going to be very, very important for any program, but certainly aligns well with the goals of WellCares. And Elizabeth said, I think beneficiaries have a right to use their money on a caregiver they see fit. All right, wonderful, thank you. What else? What else comes to mind regarding our prompt up here on the screen, which is thinking about proposed rights and responsibilities of beneficiaries? What do you think is missing? So far, we have ways to address claims of discrimination and beneficiaries having the right to use money on a caregiver they see fit. I'm thinking there's probably more out there, and I'm wondering if anybody has something that's on their mind that has not been shared in the chat. Because I'm very curious to know, and certainly we are in the process of drafting rules regarding this, and hearing this now will be really helpful for us to incorporate that into our first draft. So know that the feedback you're giving us today and the ideas being generated really directly impact that drafting process that we're doing, and really has a huge value to the rulemaking team. So I'm curious to hear if there's any other thoughts there. Said, would equal access to services include using telehealth services to find a service provider outside of their geographic area via telehealth services to find someone who speaks their language or specifically serves their population? It could include that, but I'm curious, Kyle, if you could share more about whether or not there are services already in place doing that. Is there some resource that comes to your mind when you think about telehealth services? And I think what I'm wondering about is that something I guess I have two thoughts that are coming to my mind regarding one being internal, like our customer care team. Is that who are we thinking about? Are we thinking about an external telehealth service, like a third party? And while Kyle hopefully is helping me dig into that question a little bit more, I'm going to ask Elizabeth, who put in the chat regarding a right to use their money on a caregiver they see fit. If you could clarify a little bit regarding what you mean by see fit. I think that could be helpful to understand and just make sure I'm not making assumptions when I interpret that. All right. Um, Okay, and no worries, Kyle. Feel free to keep typing. And also, if you want to raise your hand, I will unmute you. Hopefully, I haven't missed any hands so far, but um, happy to unmute you as well. All right, thank you. I will go ahead and um, allow you to talk. You are able to unmute. Go ahead, Kyle.
Hi there. So guess I'm thinking about like if somebody's LGBTQ and would prefer a service provider who is also LGBTQ or who is more sensitive to serving the LGBTQ population, or basically anybody who would want to maybe connect with a service provider that provides like maybe there's somebody of their same culture or whatnot. So just thinking about um, access if somebody's in maybe a more rural county, like we serve Lewis, Mason, and Thurston. If somebody's in Lewis County, they might want to connect. There might be service providers outside of their geographic area who they'd prefer to receive services through for whatever personal reasons. And if that would include equal access to services, would include telehealth for populations that are minority populations, where it could be harder to access culturally sensitive care in certain areas.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I don't have necessarily a solution for that off the top of my head as far as like this is what's been planned for that. But I think it's a really great area for us to think about when it comes to connecting providers and beneficiaries and the needs of our beneficiaries, especially when it comes to comfort, safety, and making sure that we have that equal access element and making, folks being able to receive the care that they want. Um, so thanks for bringing that up. Again, I don't have necessarily a solution yet, but I think that's great for us to be considering when we think about how to connect beneficiaries and providers. Right, thanks so much, Kyle. Looks like Elizabeth added to the chat. Long-term care loss as a family caregiver has to have state-approved training. Many people paying for WA Cares expressed interest in paying a family caregiver without the caregiver having to have state-approved training. Okay, thanks for clarifying that. That's helpful to know um, when it comes to that original question, clarifying how they see that beneficiaries have a right to use their money on a caregiver they see fit, recognizing that training element. So thank you. All right. Well, if you're thinking about some ideas here and typing away or still trying to figure out how you want to present the idea, please feel free to continue to work on that. I'm going to transition us to the next question. But at any point in time, feel free to answer any of these questions as we go. Again, all this information is very helpful for us. And just because I move on to another prompt doesn't mean that you need to, because that will, we'll gather these comments as we go. All right, our next prompt is up on the screen here. It says, what is the best way to inform beneficiaries of their rights and responsibilities, and when should they receive the information? So this question's getting at when, you know, at what point does it make sense to have a beneficiary receive their rights and responsibilities? Um, and within that, how is the best way to deliver that? How's that the best way to deliver that information? So while you're thinking about that, Kyle has added something to the chat saying telehealth services could also be a way to expand choices to those who live in rural areas where there may not be as many provider choices available. Wonderful. Yes, and certainly rural provider access, I think, is something we've been thinking a lot about, knowing that this is already an area that can be tricky for folks to navigate with current systems. Making sure that we are inclusive of those folks who live in rural areas and can still have their provider of choice. So thanks for adding that in, Kyle, and we will certainly take note of that. So again, the question up on the screen is, what is the best way to inform beneficiaries of their rights and responsibilities, and when should they receive the information? All right, so see Stephen said maybe an orientation packet upon vesting. All right. And to clarify language here, just again, I always like to check my assumptions. When you say vesting, what is that representing to you? And I see Elizabeth said, I think the rights and responsibility information should be on the WACARES website to let people know what will be required to use the benefit if they qualify someday. Better not to be surprised. Great information. Great to hear, Elizabeth. Thanks for sharing that. And that's really what we're thinking about, of course, regarding rules, because that's why we're here today, is thinking about developing rules and making sure that they're posted in our chapter of rule, but also thinking about when does it work into the flow for beneficiaries navigating uh, this process. And so we're working through that on our end and recognizing that will likely end up in some sort of rule language to some level, still working through the details, but it's really helpful to hear from you all around what makes sense from your perspective and your experiences when it comes to thinking about beneficiaries receiving their rights and responsibilities. What else? What else is good for us to consider here regarding the question up on the screen? Right, and Stephen has added here, I think this is clarifying the vesting language. Once folks have vested, they can file a claim. That's the point when they're ready to learn about rights and responsibilities. I normally say this info belongs at purchase, but it's apt to be forgotten. Then again, why not both? Wonderful. All right. So what I'm hearing is easy access to rights and responsibilities, likely in multiple places, of course in rural, because that's what we're focusing on here today, but also in other spaces. But likely once they are um, at that point of filing a claim or coming into the WA Cares program, would be a good place for them to be informed, specifically informed of this information shared to them. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that information with me. And I know that's very beneficial for us as we've been working through this question and creating a workflow here. But I'm going to give it another minute or two here for folks who are typing. And Kyle just added something to the chat. Kyle says, I think having the information available in writing and in video format would be helpful. I agree with Stephen at the front end, and upon notification of approval would help remind people. Wonderful. And I think that video format is a great idea. Really appreciate having that be brought up when it comes to sharing in different formats. And I see Joan saying best way should be to have multiple avenues, website, fact sheets of video. Wonderful. All right. Seems like we have general agreement, at least in the folks who are putting comments in the chat, that we want multiple avenues, easy access, and maybe some different formats as well. So it's not just in writing. So that's great to hear. All right, I'm going to move on to the next prompt. But again, if you are typing and thinking about ideas for this prompt or the past prompt, continue to do so. This is not ending that time. Just putting something up on the screen so you can start considering our next question. Our next question here is, what accessibility or equity considerations come to mind regarding rules for beneficiary rights and responsibilities? And again, that says, what accessibility or equity considerations come to mind regarding rules for beneficiary rights and responsibilities? And that could include what rights and responsibilities are going to be important for accessibility and equity. That could also be connecting us back to the question we just asked regarding how do we have, how do we do access to that? When is it provided? Those types of things. So different ways we can interpret this question, but I'm curious to hear all different perspectives from you. While you're thinking about that, I'm going to catch us up on the chat. I see Lindsay said, I also agree with multiple formats, and Joan shared videos should also be in multiple languages and sign language. Wonderful. Thank you very much, all of you, for participating in the chat and answering these questions, but certainly also thinking about all the different ways people can receive information and how important that is for access to rights and responsibilities. So thank you. Thinking about the question up on the screen, which again is, what accessibility or equity considerations come to mind regarding rules for beneficiary rights and responsibilities? So we've been touching on this a little bit, but I think we can go further. I think we have some really great minds here in the room today, in our online room, of course, but we have many great minds here, and I think we've already been starting to get into this accessibility and equity considerations, but I would like us to see if we could go a little bit further when it comes to rules, but also beneficiary rights and responsibilities. It ties back into our first question too, around like what's missing, what else do we need to be considering, how can people receive this information, but also what else? what else falls in? What else comes to your mind here when we think about this question? So Kyle said, I'm not sure how this would be written in a rule, but I'm thinking about how there are some rural areas with unreliable internet access and the application process is online. Wonderful. Okay. I think that is certainly a consideration um, that I know we've been talking about again when that comes to that rural access. Um, but that unreliable internet. Well, I think a lot of us, especially those who, like myself, who've been working remotely for a long time, can take that for granted. But I know there are a large portion of rural communities that still have limited internet access at their own at um, the areas in which they frequent. So great to think about how can we include or increase access um, when it comes to internet. So what else? Kyle got us started once again. I appreciate that, Kyle. What else can be said here? All right, and I see Elizabeth saying, I'm curious how blind people are offered state info. I think that's another great consideration. I know we do have some language access services, including Braille. I'm not necessarily skilled on that process right now, so I think that'll be a great consideration, though, to think about how can we make sure this is accessible to folks, particularly how can we make sure rules are accessible to folks who have limited vision or who experience blindness. All right, what else? All right, and I see Kyle has a hand raised, so Kyle, you are able to unmute.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about the negotiating rates with the provider and how an accessibility or equity consideration might be people's various like skill sets or previous exposure to negotiating rates. So I'm wondering about if there's a way to include resources on rate negotiation if somebody wants to learn more about that would help make it a more equitable process.
Wonderful. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Um, that is great to hear, and certainly something that we'll take note of. All right, I'm going to move us on to our next question. Again, you can continue to type if you're typing. You can continue to consider these other prompts. But our next question for you all is here up on the screen. And it says, or let's start over. It says, WalkCares is a self-directed model. What tasks may be challenging for a beneficiary who does not have a case manager? And what do you suggest for addressing these challenges? I think Kyle actually I couldn't have asked you to transition us better there, Kyle, into this question. We already got started with rate negotiation, may be a challenge for folks who have not developed that skill or not feeling necessarily as, able to navigate that or needing more resources for that. But what else comes to mind when we think about a self-directed model where there's no case manager? What do we need to consider when it comes to that beneficiary experience, and how can we overcome those, or what are some suggestions for addressing those challenges? All right. And Kyle, I see you have your hand up. You can unmute.
So I'm thinking like big picture overall, if you're at the point of applying for these services, there's probably going to be a lot of overwhelming things happening in your day-to-day life already. So just making sure that the information that they need to access to get the services is as simple and straightforward and as unconfusing as possible. So a very easy to navigate website in plain language would be, I think, key to helping people self-direct.
Wonderful. Thank you. Are there any resources? I know you brought up resources already regarding, negotiating a rate. Any other resources that come to your mind when it comes to, helping support that beneficiary, making sure it's as easy as possible?
I'd like to take that question back to the team.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. I'd be certainly happy to hear from you and your team at any point. Um, and that those are some pieces. While we're a little bit outside of rulemaking right now, it still applies to thinking about how do we make sure that this program works, and rules are the foundation of that. But certainly happy to hear from you and your team, Kyle, at any point. So thanks for bringing that up, and we'll certainly be considering that as well on within my team. How can we make this as simple as possible, as streamlined as possible for the beneficiary? Right, and I see Lindsay put in the chat. I'm thinking that we need to enlist the help of other family members and local social service agencies. And Lindsay, would you mind sharing just a little bit more about what that help could look like, or how we could enlist that help of others? And while Lindsay may be responding to that question, just a reminder, we're working on this question. And for those of you who may be joining us now, we're working on the question up on the screen. Walkers is a self-directed model. What tasks may be challenging for a beneficiary who does not have a case manager? And what do you suggest to address those challenges? All right, I'm going to move us on to the next prompt. I'm not seeing any responses, but I am hoping to get a little clarification or a little follow-up question that I asked Lindsay regarding enlisting the help of others, such as family members and local social service agencies. And Lindsay, if you don't have a response, that's okay too. But just hoping to dig into that just a little bit more to capture what that help could look like. But while we are thinking about that, I'm going to put our last prompt up on the screen. We have here that WACARES may be the first time individuals access long-term services and supports. How could rules support beneficiaries in navigating their benefit through a self-directed model? And I'll add a follow-up question here for those who may already be in the social service world or maybe someone who has access social services. Has there been ways that you've used rules that have been helpful to navigating a program and recognizing not all programs are self-directed like WACARES, but I'll add that in there for you all to consider is that has there been times when rules have helped support your clients or yourself in navigating a program? And if so, what did that look like? I'll add that in as kind of a secondary question, but feel free to answer either of the questions I've asked here, but also any of the ones I've already asked on previous slides. All right, I see Joan has put a comment in the chat. From a broad perspective, someone potentially getting into long-term services and supports may be overwhelmed by having to deal with negotiating with different service providers, financial management of the benefit, hiring and firing caregivers, conflict management, understanding and making medical management. What are services from WACARE's fund or other agencies that can help with these? Well, I know that we have covered some approved services in the past that could be able to help depending on the circumstances, and we have covered those. I am by no means a subject matter expert in our approved services. So there could be some, but I am curious, Joan, if there are ones that come to your mind around what services are out there, or have you had experiences with programs already that have a model that you're thinking of or have had positive impacts on folks dealing with layers of this? And I'm recognizing there's no WACARES program out there right now, but thinking about folks already navigating sometimes complex systems, particularly those who may be private paying right now, and having to kind of manage a lot of these pieces. So curious if you have any current systems or services or things that come to your mind when you think about um, what kind of service could support someone navigate that? Because I think that would be really interesting to know and for us to be able to research a bit more. So what else? We have on the screen here, while cares may be the first time individuals access long-term services and supports. How could rules support beneficiaries in navigating their benefit through a self-directed model? And my follow-up or secondary question is, have you had experiences either for yourself or in supporting others when rules have helped somebody navigate a program? And if so, what did that look like, or what was that experience? So I see a question coming in from Elizabeth. Does the private long-term care industry offer something along with their product to resource people? Would be worth looking into if you have not. And that's a great question. I know we've been working very closely with some of the long-term care private industry organizations who are helping us learn a lot about this process. But that's something I will have to take back to my team to understand what that would look like or what they offer in navigating that. And Lindsay said, I'm thinking about how Sheba Volunteer help people navigate Medicare. Okay, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. That's a great example that we can certainly be looking to as far as examples of some level of care navigation. Thank you. And what else? All right, Kyle, feel free to unmute.
So I'm thinking about how, with this being self-directed, there could be providers who offer more than one service, and it could be that that beneficiary has selected just one specific service. So, but that provider offers other services that could be covered with walk cares. So I think making it clear, I don't know if there's any rules around providers soliciting services or if there's going to be any language to help people identify like who's somebody who's scamming them. I'm thinking about when open enrollment opens up and seniors are inundated with really scams to get them. So if there could be any rights or responsibilities that help people identify what is a scam and what's intentional, or that they have the right to decline offered services, something that just helps protect beneficiaries who might not realize that they have a choice or might be directed towards somebody that's actually not part of WellCares.
Yeah, that's a great call out, Kyle. Thanks for bringing that up. I think that's certainly, I know that's resonating with me. So thanks for calling that out, and we'll certainly take note of that around how can we support folks. Making sure also that this does not become an opportunity for scammers, one more opportunity for scammers to get access to, to people of our communities, but particularly vulnerable adults. Right. Looking for any last comments here on this question. I'm certainly curious how we can make sure rules are benefiting folks. I know rules are not a space for creative writing, and that certainly we won't be doing creative writing in ours, but also thinking about our audience and how things can be used. How can we make sure that things are clear to support somebody navigating the system? And of course, that will be our goal no matter what. But hearing from you all is really helpful in making sure that we're hearing from different perspectives, that we're thinking about different ways people may be engaging with our rules, and recognizing as well that, all these different folks who may be coming and returning to administrative rules to help understand a program or make sure somebody's getting connected with the services that they should be getting connected with. So I will pause here for any last questions, and then we will move on. So one more pause in case anybody wants to chime in about this question or any other question we've asked today. I'll leave it wide open here for us. All right, I'm not seeing anything right now, but if you're typing, keep typing. I'm going to repeat in the chat here our resources. I want to make sure everybody has access to that. We have our DSHS website where you can find more information about the DSHS rulemaking activities. We have Employment Security Department's website where you can find information about their rulemaking activities. They are doing rulemaking for WellCares right now. So if you are interested in what they're doing, go check out their website. HCA will be doing rulemaking in 2025, but they do have a rulemaking website. You can go and make sure you can follow along with any activity that they're going to be doing. Please remember to direct questions about the WellCares program to wellcares@dshs.wa.gov. You'll be able to find that in the chat. But for questions about the rulemaking process, you can reach out to me, Ariel Finney, at ariel.finney2@dshs.wa.gov. You'll also find that in the chat. Otherwise, please join us on May 29th from 2 p.m. until whenever we end, but no later than 4 p.m., where we'll be discussing provider rights as well as the provider application process. We will once again follow a similar model, but we will be bringing in a new subject matter expert to talk to us about providers. We will be focusing the next 3 meetings on provider rulemaking. So if you're a provider, or you know providers, or you think that's going to be helpful for you to be part of, please make sure to join us. And also please share these resources with others so folks who want to participate can participate. Please also know, though, that these meetings are recorded and made available on our DSHS rulemaking website. So again, I put that in the chat. If you or your peers or other folks that you know have missed some of these sessions, you can go back and watch all the ones we've done so far. We also have copies of the slide deck there. So if you miss one, you can catch up. I am always interested in feedback. So even though we end today, that does not mean that these questions are closed. So please feel free to take these back to your team, consider it, talk amongst yourselves and send me any ideas you have regarding these questions or other things that come to mind when it comes to rulemaking about the subjects we've talked about so far. I know that I will be eager to receive that information and be able to incorporate that as we move forward in rulemaking. Before we close, I see one more comment coming in from Stephen. Rules-based, if beneficiaries are directed to a state portal to find and select registered providers, then that site can be leveraged as a place to disseminate resources for self-directed care. See how Care Scout does it here. Wonderful. Thanks for putting that in the chat for us, Stephen. And please make sure to check out that resource as an example. Certainly, we will be taking the feedback we've heard today and thinking about how we can incorporate that into our rulemaking, into creating resources, thinking through that beneficiary experience. So once again, thank you all for being here. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you on May 29th for another round. Thank you so much.